There is a particular quality to the decisions that the hardest moments demand. They are not the decisions where the right answer is obvious but difficult to execute. Those are hard enough. The decisions that really test an institution, that separate the ones that endure from the ones that crumble, are the ones where every available option carries a serious cost, where there is no clean path forward, where the choice is not between right and wrong, but between different versions of loss. The British royal family in 2026 is living inside exactly that kind of moment. And the most difficult decision the palace has faced, a decision that is not behind them but unfolding around them right now in real time, is not a single choice, but a cluster of interconnected ones, each one touching the others, each one made more complicated by the ones that came before, and each one carrying consequences that will echo forward into the reign that follows this one. Start with the decision that has already been made and that required more courage than it might appear from the outside. On the 30th of October 2025, Buckingham Palace issued a statement that carried within it the full weight of what it means to be the King of England and the older brother of a man under criminal investigation simultaneously. The statement announced that King Charles III had that day initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles, and honors of Prince Andrew. In plain English, the king had decided to strip his brother of everything, not just the working royal status that had been removed in 2019, everything that remained: the Duke of York title, the formal honors, the remaining ceremonial associations, the last institutional threads that connected Andrew Mountbatten Windsor to the family and the institution he had served and then catastrophically damaged. It was a decision that, once made, could not be unmade. You do not give a man back the titles you took from him. You do not restore the dignity that the removal publicly stripped away. Charles signed the paperwork and it was done, and Andrew was left with his name, his freedom while under investigation, and the growing legal jeopardy of a man who had spent his life inside a golden cage and now found himself outside it without any of the protection the cage had provided. But the difficult decisions did not start there, and they have not ended there. They started much earlier, in the years when warnings were available and went unheeded. Here is the detail that sits at the heart of the palace's most damaging institutional failure. A whistleblower warned Charles of Andrew's abuse of power in office months before Andrew's infamous Newsnight interview in November 2019. Months before the Pizza Express alibi, before the unable to sweat explanation, before the global humiliation that made Andrew's position as a working royal untenable and forced him to step back from duties within 4 days of the broadcast. Charles knew something was wrong before the world knew, and the decision that was made in that window of knowledge was not to act but to manage, not to remove but to hope, not to demand accountability but to maintain the institutional protection that royal status had always provided. That decision, made before the Newsnight disaster, made before Virginia Giuffre's civil lawsuit, made before the Epstein files began their steady, devastating release, is the original difficult decision, the one that made every subsequent difficult decision harder. The Newsnight interview itself was a decision. The palace communications apparatus approved it. Senior aides believed Andrew could make his case effectively, and that the alternative, continued silence, was generating more damage than an explanation would. They were wrong in a manner so comprehensive and so public that it remains, 7 years later, the case study that communications professionals around the world use to illustrate how not to handle a reputational crisis. Andrew sat opposite Emily Maitlis and explained himself in terms that a global audience of hundreds of millions found not merely unconvincing but actively, almost comically, counterproductive. The Pizza Express, the sweating, the vague non-memory of a woman whose photograph with him had been in newspaper archives for years. The decision to broadcast that interview cost the institution more than the silence it replaced. And the decision to let Andrew try to explain himself set a precedent for allowing the man to be the author of his own narrative in ways that repeatedly made things worse rather than better. After Newsnight came the decision about how long to wait. Andrew stepped back from duties in November 2019. He was not stripped of his military roles and royal patronages until January 2022, when the civil lawsuit filed by Virginia Giuffre made the Queen's continued tolerance of his ceremonial presence completely untenable. 2 years. 2 years of not quite acting, of the institution absorbing the story and hoping it would lose momentum, of the particular royal instinct toward managed inaction that has served the family in some contexts and failed it catastrophically in this one. Queen Elizabeth II, by the accounts of multiple biographers, was warned repeatedly about Andrew's conduct by people who were in a position to know. She did not act with the urgency those warnings warranted. She loved her son. She protected what she loved in the way that parents do, which is to say imperfectly and with a bias that prioritized the person over the institution. The difficult decision, the one that would have caused short-term pain but prevented long-term catastrophe, was to act earlier, decisively, before the mountain of evidence became a range of mountains. That decision was not made, and the people who paid the highest price for its not being made were not members of the royal family. They were the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's abuse, who found the pursuit of justice made harder by the institutional protection that surrounded one of the men they were accusing. Then came the moment that nobody in the palace had prepared for, the 19th of February, 2026. The arrest, police vehicles on the Sandringham estate, Andrew in a car being driven to Aylsham police station, Reuters photographer Phil Noble capturing the image of a shell-shocked man that would travel around the world in minutes. The palace received 30 minutes notice. 30 minutes between the information arriving and the news becoming public. In 30 minutes, a communications team has to draft a statement that will be read by hundreds of millions of people in dozens of languages, that will be parsed for every word and every silence, that will be judged not just on what it says but on what it does not say, and that will be seen as the institution's first formal expression of where it stands in the most severe crisis it has faced in nearly a century. The statement that emerged was 100 words long. It expressed the deepest concern. It said the law must take its course. It said the family would continue in duty and service. It did not call Andrew his brother. The decision about that word, about whether a king refers to the man under arrest as his brother or as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor or not at all, is the kind of decision that takes a second to make and carries years of meaning. Charles chose institutional distance. He chose the language of a monarch managing a crisis rather than a brother managing a family emergency. Whether that was the right decision depends entirely on what you believe the monarchy's primary obligation is. To the family or to the institution? To the person inside the role or to the role itself? Charles chose the role. He always has. But the cost of that choice, to him personally, to the relationship with his brother that had been complicated long before any of this began, is not nothing. It is considerable, and it is his to carry alone. The decision that followed the arrest, and that was announced publicly in a way that broke constitutional precedent, was the government's declaration that it was not ruling out removing Andrew Mountbatten Windsor from the line of succession. On the 21st of February, 2026, 2 days after the arrest, the Times reported that the Prime Minister was willing to introduce legislation to strip Andrew of his right to succeed to the throne. On the 23rd of February, the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister told the House of Commons plainly that the government was not ruling out action in respect of the line of succession and would consider whether any further steps were required in due course. The defense minister, Luke Pollard, said the government had absolutely been working with Buckingham Palace to prevent Mountbatten Windsor from potentially being a heartbeat away from the throne. The Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese wrote to the Prime Minister directly, stating that Australia would agree to any proposal to remove Andrew from the line of succession. New Zealand followed, Canada followed. Cross-party support in Westminster was confirmed by the Liberal Democrat leader, who called it intolerable for Andrew Mountbatten Windsor to succeed to the crown. Removing someone from the line of succession is not a simple act. It has never happened this way before. When Edward VIII gave up the throne in 1936, he signed an instrument of abdication himself, voluntarily. He chose. Nobody had ever been forcibly expelled from the British line of succession in the way that was now being discussed in relation to Andrew. Royal author Robert Jobson noted this directly. "There is no precedent for a royal enforced removal," he wrote. "Even Catholic King James II, who fled the country, was declared an abdication by Parliament, even though he never accepted it. Nobody has ever been forcibly expelled from the British succession. What was being proposed in February 2026 was, constitutionally speaking, something new. An Act of Parliament, approved by MPs and peers, removing a member of the royal family from the succession while he remained alive, while he had not been convicted of any crime, while he remained under investigation rather than under charge. The legal and constitutional complexity of it is matched only by the political necessity of it. Nobody who understands the public mood in Britain in 2026 seriously believes that the idea of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor potentially sitting on the throne, however distant the mathematical probability, is one that the public or any serious politician could defend with a straight face. And then, interweaving through all of this, is the decision about Harry, because the difficult decisions the palace faces are not only about Andrew, they are about the other estranged member of the family, the one whose departure was voluntary rather than imposed, who left rather than being pushed, and who is now, in July 2026, returning to British soil with his wife and his children for the first time in 4 years. The decision about how to handle Harry's return is perhaps the most politically delicate and personally painful choice the institution currently faces, because it sits at the intersection of everything that is most complicated about the royal family's present situation. Charles wants to see his grandchildren. He has not seen Archie in any meaningful way since the Platinum Jubilee in June 2022. He met Lilibet then for the only time in her life when she was 1 year old, making it almost certain she has no memory of him. 4 years, a king with cancer, 2 small children growing up without knowing their grandfather. The decision about whether and how to make that reunion happen and what it signals about the institution's position on the broader Harry question carries more weight than any logistical challenge around scheduling or security can fully account for. The security dimension is itself one of the most difficult decisions Charles has been navigating. Harry lost his publicly funded police protection when he stepped back from royal duties in 2020. He has spent years fighting in British courts to have that protection reinstated, arguing that his family's safety cannot be adequately guaranteed without it. The courts have found against him on multiple occasions. But Charles has now reportedly taken the decision to offer Harry and his family a royal residence to stay in during their July visit and to assist with security arrangements. According to reporting from the Daily Mail, these arrangements were brokered through Theo Rycroft, the king's influential deputy private secretary, a former diplomat and former minister at the British Embassy in Paris, who is being described by those who know him as the nice guy of palace diplomacy, calm and skilled and deeply trusted. Rycroft is said to believe the conflict between William and Harry is ridiculous and has made settling the rift his personal priority within the palace. It was Rycroft who facilitated the 55-minute meeting between Charles and Harry at Clarence House on the 10th of September 2025, their first face-to-face encounter in 19 months. It was Rycroft's office that was reportedly conducting quiet back-channel conversations with Harry's aides before the U.S. state visit in April, conversations that William was not informed about, that reportedly infuriated him when he became aware of them. The decision Charles took to facilitate Harry's July visit to offer the residence and the security help was taken with the full knowledge that it would not go down well with William. His elder son has been clear about his position for years. Any accommodation of Harry, any softening of the institutional distance, any gesture that could be read as rewarding or legitimizing the choices Harry has made, is something William cannot accept. The palace aide who briefed about William's position described it with a clarity that left nothing ambiguous. William has absolutely no interest in mending fences with Harry. He has shut the door, and he is not opening it. But Charles is the king. He is the one with authority for however long that authority endures, and he has made the decision, with eyes open to what it costs him in his relationship with William, to see his grandchildren. Not to wait for William's blessing, not to subordinate the years he may have left as a living grandfather to the institutional calculus of his heir, to see his grandchildren. That is a very human decision, dressed in the language of royal logistics and diplomatic facilitation, but human at its core. A 77-year-old man with cancer who wants to hold his grandchildren before the time for holding them is gone. Meanwhile, on the 25th of June 2026, the day this particular accounting of difficult decisions is being written, Charles became the first British monarch in history to reveal his personal tax bill. The Duchy of Lancaster, his private estate, generated more than £24 million in profit in the previous year. His tax on that income, on his personal investments, on his privately owned estates at Sandringham and Balmoral, was being made public for the first time. The move was described by Buckingham Palace as intended to enhance transparency and broaden public understanding of the royal family's responsibilities. The analysis that ran alongside the announcement was more direct. The decision was driven by months of embarrassing headlines about Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, by the Epstein files, by the public and parliamentary demand for accountability that had been building since the arrest in February, and by the recognition inside the palace that an institution that cannot account for itself financially will eventually be called to account in ways it cannot control. The tax disclosure was a difficult decision in the specific sense that no institution gives up opacity willingly, that the information released opens questions about what was not disclosed before, and that transparency, once begun, generates its own momentum toward more transparency that can be harder to manage than secrecy. But it was the right decision. Analysts across the political spectrum said so. The monarchy's credibility, as royal commentator Emily Andrews had said directly, depends on decisive action. This was decisive action. Long overdue, but real. King Charles arrived to cheers and shouted questions and unmistakable sounds of disapproval at various engagements in the weeks following Andrew's arrest. He was fanned by a top aide at a climate reception in St. James's Palace on the 24th of June, the hottest June day ever recorded in Britain, dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief while joking about the heat with international climate envoys in the kind of moment that would have been undignified in a previous era, and that in 2026 simply makes him look human and relatable and stubbornly present. He kept going, Through the arrest and the scrutiny and the parliamentary debates about succession and the difficult conversations with aides and the 55-minute tea with his younger son and the tax disclosure and the heat wave and the 4 prime ministers his reign had now consumed, he kept going. Not calm, perhaps, not serene, but present, deliberate, making the most difficult decisions with the tools available to him, in the circumstances available to him, on behalf of an institution that has survived everything it has encountered for 1,000 years, because the people inside it kept making decisions when making any decision at all was the hardest possible thing to do. The decisions are not over. Andrew's succession status remains unresolved, pending further parliamentary action. Harry's July visit remains a live and unpredictable situation with no guaranteed outcome. The Epstein files are still being released. The investigation is ongoing. William's relationship with his father is under strain that has not been repaired. The public's support for the monarchy has fallen to levels that require sustained and credible action to recover. None of the most difficult things are behind them. They are still in the middle of them, making decisions in conditions that nobody designed this institution to navigate. But they are making them. And in 2026, with everything that entails, that is what the palace's most difficult decision really is. Not any single choice, but the daily, ongoing, unrelenting decision to keep deciding, to keep acting, to keep being there, making the calls that no handbook covers, in service of something that they have decided is worth the cost of keeping.